Hey, this is another video by PetRock. Today I'm working on my wife's 98 Ford Mustang 3.8 liter and I'm going to be replacing the power steering rack. So the first thing you need to do is before you even jack up the car is you should just crack the lug nuts on your wheels. So once you do get it up in the air, it makes it easier to get the wheels off. You don't have to unspin them all the way, just get them so that they're loose, just 1 or 2 turns, whatever, and then you jack the car up. Okay, now that you got the car in the air, let's take the tire off. Okay, once you got the tire loose, you take it off all the way and put it underneath the car, preferably near the frame rail, so that if the car does drop, you want it to land on the tire. You don't want it to land on yourself, on you, or on the floor, or straight onto the rotor. Okay, next you take the cotter pin that's in the tie rod end and bend it out of the way, and then ultimately remove it. Okay, once you got the cotter pin out, you want to take a deep well socket. In this case, it's a 19mm. I've already replaced these tie rod ends about 6 months ago. These are made by Moog. The castle nut that came with them is a 19mm. I don't remember what the stock nut size was, but in this case, it's 19. You just pop the nut off. You don't want to spin it off all the way. You want to spin it off most of the way. This is so that we can bang this this guy out. Before we remove this guy, which is going to require force with a hammer, we want to remove the speed sensor. It's right there. The reason being is that sometimes the sensors can be a little bit sensitive to heavy shock, so it's a good idea to remove them if your car comes equipped with it. In this case, it's an E8 Torx bit. It's inverted. It's so the actual head is like a star. So it looks like that. Sorry if I'm blocking the light. And just pull it out like that and tuck it out of the way. Okay, now that that sensor's out of the way, now you want to take a big BFH and you want to hit right here. You don't want to hit the tie rod end, you'll ruin the tie rod end. You want to hit right here, which is part of the steering knuckle. The vibration will break loose this stud and it'll just drop right out. So that's why you want to have the castle nut on the top, but held on by a couple threads, so when it does drop, it doesn't just drop on the floor or just drop loose. So you want to, if you have the brake shield in here, you just want to keep that out of the way and make sure not to hit your fender. There we go. Before you take the tie rod all the way off, now that it's loose, you want to break the jam nut loose. You can technically do this once you have the whole rack off. It's just easier to do it when you have it in the spindle, so then it won't spin as much on you. So now that you got the jam nut loose, next, in order to try to get as close to an same alignment as you had before, you want to spin the outer tie rod end off, but you want to count the number of threads, the number of turns I should say, so that when we put everything back together again, we're going to spin it back on again the same number of turns, so that you can get at least reasonably close to your alignment. So when you do take it to alignment shop after doing this job, you won't ruin your tires on the way there. So just count them as they go around. 1, 2, 24, 24 and a half. Take note of how many turns it took for your car. Your number of turns will vary. So then once you got to this point, next thing you do, you just switch to the other side and do the same thing. Okay, once you've got the other side disconnected and loose, before you take the outer tie rod off completely, you want to go into the car and straighten out the wheels so that the steering wheel is in the centered position. You want to do this so that when you install the new rack, you just center up the right and left sides of the rack and install it, and you'll know that you're going to be centered again. So before you take the tie rod completely off, you need to try to prevent the steering wheel from moving. Yeah, it'll lock like that left and right, but just for added security, you should take the take your seat belt and click it in. So you have the seat belt basically preventing the steering wheel from turning. The reason for this is that there's a spring in the middle of the steering wheel that controls the airbag. It's called the clock spring. If the steering wheel rotates too far in one direction or the other, you can break that spring, and when that happens, these buttons stop working, your airbag stops working, and on some cars the horn stops working. So yeah, you want to lock the steering wheel in a centered position so that it won't move. Now you climb underneath the driver's side of the car and unbolt the pinch bolt for the steering column. It's a little bit difficult. If you need to rotate the steering wheel slightly to get this to get access to the bolt, do so. Just don't rotate the steering wheel too far, and make sure when you're done you put the steering wheel back in its previous centered position. Once you have the bolt undone, you take a small pry bar, a reasonable size pry bar, and I use the mounting bolt for the motor mount and pry up against it to disconnect it. The steering column will disconnect and will telescope up and just move it out of the way. Okay, next we're about to get messy. You want to remove the power steering pump cap, because we're going to need to drain out all the fluid that's in there, and you don't want it causing a suction or a vacuum as the fluid drains out. Underneath the car on the driver's side, this is the power steering rack over here. You got four different lines going across around here, and we need to unplug only one of them in order to drain the power steering pump. This line right here, coming out of the power steering rack, going into a solid fitting right here, that's the high pressure line that goes straight up to the power steering rack. Power steering pump. On the side, there's a little nut, and then this is the low pressure side coming out of the power steering rack. It goes to just a regular hose that goes into effectively a little cooler that goes through the front of the behind the bumper, and that comes back out here on the bottom side. And this bottom hose goes all the way up to the power steering pump, and it's the low pressure side. So it's the low pressure side that we want to disconnect and drain out. We're going to disconnect it from right here and then drain out the power steering pump. And I like to use a set of long 90-degree pliers. You can use whatever you got handy. Okay, so you just slide the clamp over. Sorry I didn't get it on camera, I had to use two hands to do it. And next what you want to do is you want to take your pliers and you want to break the seal on the hose just by taking it and twisting. Like that. Now I'm gonna have to go off camera again because I need two hands. You just pull that line off, and be careful, have your pan directly underneath because a whole bunch of fluid is gonna come out. Okay, so it's disconnected. Just let it drain for a while, because again it's got to go from the power steering pump down this line through the tubes that's going down the side of the bumper and then back again to here. It's all basically running off of gravity right now. It's a very small tube, very small hole. So this is going to take a little while. To speed things up, you could probably get a turkey baster and suck the fluid out of the pump first and then pull this line so there's not as much fluid in the lines to begin with. I normally do that, however today my turkey baster is indisposed, so I can't use it. Anyway, so I'm just going to let this drain for a while and I'll be right back. Okay, next, while we're waiting for that to drain, we need to get a little bit of slack in this high pressure line right here. So there's a mounting bracket right here that's attached by that nut, or bolt I should say, right there, that you need to remove so that this will be able to freely move, spin around a little bit so we can lower the power steering rack without having to disconnect the high pressure line from the pump. This hose can now freely spin. Okay, so it's pretty much well drained. So now just take the pump, or the hose I should say, and just kind of fold it back on itself to stop the dripping. Now the only drips you got to worry about now are coming from this. Be a good idea to get a plastic bag and a rubber band and just tie it around the end of this. When we drop the rack, fluid's going to come out of here. Especially if you by accident move the tie rods in or out, the fluid is going to squirt out of here. So you want to have something to protect yourself so you don't get all fluid all over yourself. Okay, now it's time to undo these bolts over here. This is an 18mm. You want a deep well socket, and the other side of this bolt terminates somewhere around here, right behind the front of the control arm. So you want like a 6-inch extension and a 15mm socket to hold the bolt in place as you turn this side. Okay, once you got the nut off, take the washer along with it, taking note of which side pointed which direction, because this only goes on one way, and then do the same thing to the other side. Now that you got the bolts out of both sides, you'll notice that the bolt is actually free floating in its hole. That's because the rack is actually attached via the bushings to this metal sleeve right there, which is part of the frame. Next, we want to get a small pry bar and pry the rack out. So now we're ready to remove the rack and pinion. The only thing holding it on right now are the two sleeves on either side. So I've set up two jack stands underneath the rack, so that when I do take it off, I'll rest it down on that in order to give me clearance so I can remove the hoses from the rack completely. So you just work either side lightly, back and forth, until it slides off. There we go. Now the rack is resting on the jack stands. I have access to the hoses right here, and so I can remove them cleanly without making too big of a mess. Okay, this is the driver's side of the power steering rack. Now that it's down off the frame, we got to remove this line and this line right here. This is the high pressure line, this is the low pressure line. They're both 18 millimeter. Be very careful not to strip these. If you strip these bolts or these nuts, you're going to have to replace the the entire high pressure line in this case, or the metal tube for the low pressure line. So sorry for the shaking, but I'm doing this one-handed. Okay, once you got the lines disconnected, the power steering rack should be completely free. Be wary that fluid will come out of these two ports, as well as from the lines that you just removed. Now we're going to take the rack down and move it over to the bench. Okay, here the bottom rack is the one that was in the car that I just removed. The top rack is a replacement. So this is a point where you want to double check to make sure that all the parts on the new one match the parts on the old one, as well as transferring over any parts that you may need. For example, the mounting bushings, you just pop the old ones out. They're usually in a two-piece form. You just pop them out, pop them into the new one. Sometimes the kits you can get will come with new ones, or if they don't, then now would be a good time to switch over to polyurethane bushings, which I did about 6 months ago. So I'm just going to pop out the bushings that are in the old rack and install them into the new one. So one thing that does need to be transferred over from the old rack to the new rack is this dust boot that goes around the top. The new one didn't come with one, so I need to take this one off. Just going to spin it until it comes off. Looks to be in pretty good shape, and just slide it back on. Spin it a little bit till it seats. There's a little groove right here in the shaft that this is supposed to mate up with. Because you're going to have to ship this rack back to where you bought it from for a core charge, you're going to have to mail it back, and it's going to have oil in it. There's still probably a good amount of oil in here. So what you want to do is to basically make your mailman happy. You want to transfer over the plugs so that oil doesn't start gushing out while it's in transport. You don't have to worry about putting the plug in the wrong holes, because the hole in the top up here is a much wider diameter than this one, so that you won't be able to get them mixed up, which is also handy when you're putting the hoses back on. I'll show you that later. So even though this is a new rack, there may still be some power steering fluid in it from when they were testing it at the remanufacture place, so just be careful of that. It may drip a little bit. Don't forget to also take the jam nuts for your tie rod ends out and transfer them over to the new one. When I installed this old rack, let's say 6 months to a year ago, I put some anti-seize on the threads, so that's one reason this is spinning on so well. If you live in the Rust Belt or areas where there's a lot of rust problems, you're probably going to want to do the same thing. I'll be adding some later when I put the tie rod ends on. So for now, I'm just going to spin this on lightly, so about where it was before. And don't forget to do the other side as well. So one difference I just noticed is that even though both these racks were remanufactured by the same company, they're using different inner tie rods, and the old tie rod ends are about 14.5 inches, where the new one is only 14. So there's a half-inch difference between these two tie rod ends. So that means that the count of how many turns you took the tie rod end off is going to be different to get you back in line. If you put the tie rod end on back the same number of turns that it was on this rack, you're going to be inboard about a half inch. So I'm going to have to figure out how many turns to not do when I put the new tie rod ends on. The way I do that is not exactly scientific, but it kind of works. Is just counting threads. From there to there is about a half inch. So now I just count the threads. I'll use my trusty red pointer. 1, 2, 9. So I have to subtract 9 turns from the number of turns that I had taken the outer tie rods off. If I remember correctly, I'd have to look at my notes, but they were, I think it was 24 on one side. When I'm putting it back on, that means I'd only do... So another difference between this is actually a configuration thing. This vent tube on the old rack is on the bottom. It's on the top on the new rack. I remember that the stock rack also had the vent tube on the bottom. I'm not sure it's going to be a problem. It may be a clearance issue with this vehicle. I'm not sure. I have to. I won't know until I get this up to the rack. But if it is, it's not a big deal. I can just rotate the bellows boots down. So this is the low side of the rack. When the fluid is exiting the rack and going back towards the power steering pump, this is where it goes through. The kit comes with a little bag of nylon washers that need to go onto the low and the high side ends that go into the rack. Otherwise it's going to leak. I'm going to show you how to do the one on the low pressure side just because it's easy. I can get it on my bench. But the one on the high pressure side, you're going to need to do that on the car. It's not that difficult. As I said earlier, the high pressure and low pressure sides have different diameters. So you have a small and you have a large diameter O-ring. And so obviously the low pressure side has the higher diameter, so they use the higher diameter O-ring on the low pressure side. In order to install it, you have to loosen the nylon O-ring, and you do that by basically putting it in some hot water for a couple minutes just to soften it up a little bit, and then you stretch it out over some kind of a taper. So I have this cup of hot water that I just put in the microwave for about 2 minutes. Let the O-rings sit in there for a couple minutes so they're nice and soft, and then we'll stretch them out. Okay, it's been about 2 minutes. So fish out your O-ring. And in my case, the best taper that I was able to find is just an old 3-inch extension. So you just take it, and if you can see, you just try to push it down around this taper at the base of the extension. If you have a punch or some other kind of thing that would work better, go for it. The key is to stretch it out a little bit such that it will fit over the threads of this one without breaking. So I got it on partially, as you can see, and now I just gotta snake it on down. I gotta hurry before it gets too cold. Just using my fingernail, and that's it. So now you need to do the same thing with the smaller O-ring to the high pressure side fitting. Okay, so I got the new rack up on jack stands underneath the front of the car. This is so I can attach the high and low pressure lines again. So the low pressure line has to go on first. It's the bottom hole. Start it by hand, like that. You don't want to cross thread this. Again, this is an aluminum housing. I'm not sure what type of metal this is, but cross threading it would not be a good idea. And then once you've got it in a little bit, you can use your wrench to tighten it on down. So just snug it down. That's about good. Now, don't worry if this is loose. It's actually supposed to be like that. This whole thing is supposed to swivel. This is okay. Tightening it further will not actually tighten that up. It'll still be loose no matter how tight you make it. Okay, now it's time to mount the rack back up onto the car. I'm using polyurethane bushings made by Energy Suspension, and what I found was that if I install the halves of the bushings separately, so that I install the one onto the frame first, like that one is, then push the rack onto the bushings on the frame, then press the other half onto the rack, it goes on a lot easier. It's a pretty tight fit. The polyurethane bushings at least are quite snug. Rubber bushings, I don't know how loose they would be. They might be easier, I don't know. But in this case, this is how I found it to be easier. So just take it, line it up, press it on, use what you can for leverage, making sure to get both sides on, and then take the other half of the bushing, press it on, and the other half as well. Now push the bolt through, the other side. Okay, those of you who have watched any of my other videos, you know that I'm a lover of anti-seize, especially in an area that's in contact with weather. And being that this is the front of the car, it's definitely in contact with weather. So I like to put a little dab of anti-seize, just that much. Then you put the washer with the concave, or convex, I can never remember, the caved inside facing in, and then put the bolt on. So that nut gets torqued down to 31 to 39 foot-pounds. So cut it in half, 35. So as I said before, the back side of the bolt on that side is 15 millimeters. The nut itself is 18 millimeters. Okay, so I've got the rack bolted down. And one thing I noticed, which I was afraid of, is, I don't know if you can see it, but the vent tube that goes all the way across from one bellows boot to the other is hitting the wiring harness. So I need to move it where the old rack had it, which is in the front. So I need to move it here. In order to do that, I need to loosen up these clamps right here slightly. Not enough to pop them, but if they do pop, it's not a big deal. Anyway, so I need to loosen these up slightly and rotate the bellows boot down. Okay, loosen these. It's actually not that difficult. But right here is where the two pieces of metal were crimped together to clamp it down. So what you do is you get a screwdriver. Hopefully I'm not blocking you too bad. Grate it in there and just wiggle it back and forth just to make a little bit of a space. And then you'll be able to rotate the bellows boot all you want. I want to show another angle of this. This is the passenger side. So the screwdriver I'm using is not very big. It's a little bit small. And you just put it in this little hole on one side and just rotate slightly just to loosen up the clamp. That's all you're doing. You're not disengaging the clamp. You don't want the clamp to pop. You just want it to loosen enough so that you can rotate the entire assembly down like that. Once you've got both bellows boots where you want them, you stick the breather rod in one side, then you stick it into the other side like that, and you're done. We're almost done, actually. We're not done quite. So you want it above this block here and above this block here, going all the way across. Once you've got everything positioned correctly and you've made sure that the boot is pushed as far in as possible, now you just take a set of wire cutters like this. Hard to do this with one hand. Like most things working on a car, it's hard to do with one hand. And just crimp down on it. You're not going to try to cut it, you're just trying to crimp down in order to secure the boot. Again, it doesn't have to be so tight, it just needs to be on there snug so that it won't come off. Now, if by chance while you're doing this clamp does pop off, like it separates, it's useless, it's junk. Just put it in the trash or recycle bin, whatever. You can just take a regular zip tie and put that around here and zip it closed. That'll be perfectly fine. Okay, now you gotta take the hose that we tucked up above earlier and hopefully get it on camera. Reconnect it to the rack. Might help to twist as you're pushing on. Next, you take your pliers and clamp down on the clamp and walk it into position and let go. Try to position it such that it was in the same place it was before, roughly. There you go. Hopefully I got all that on camera. I was kind of doing it with one-handed. So one last thing, my stock rack had a zip tie that went between these three hoses right here, those three tubes, to prevent these things from rattling around. As I said earlier, these things are loose, they will move, and this will help prevent them from rattling too much. So set up a zip tie, bring it on down. Loose but snug is all you need. You just cut off the excess. So if you notice now, these things don't move as much as they did before. Now, don't forget to install the bracket onto the side of the car, and you just put the nut bolt in. You get that bolt stuttered by hand. Again, it's just screwing into sheet metal, so there's not a lot of bite to it. So you just want to snug it down. You don't need to torque it down really hard. Okay, so I've got it all bolted down, and I've got the breather hose where I want it to be. Now, what you want to do is you want to check out the bellows boots, and one, make sure that they're not kinked, but two, you want them to be about equally on both sides in and out, so that that'll help ensure that the rack is currently in a centered position. More often than not, it'll come in a centered position, but you still want to double check. It might have gotten jostled as you were during shipping or as you were installing it. So in my case, the passenger side is extended out a little bit longer than the driver's side. So I'm just going to pull the driver's side out slightly to even things out. Now we need to connect the steering linkage to the rack again. So if you're lucky, this will just line up. Chances are you'll probably need to move the tie rods in and out slightly. Even just a centimeter will cause this thing to spin a few times. So just very lightly adjust this to make it so it lines up with the notches in the steering linkage. An additional thing you should do is, because again this is exposed to the elements and this is a very common rust point, is to put a little bit of anti-seize on the shaft before cinching it all down. Being that this is a job for two hands, I'm not going to be able to get this on film. It's a little bit tight quarters underneath here, so hopefully you understood my explanation of what needs to happen next. Steering linkage can only go on one way, so it's not like you're going to put it on backwards. The key is you don't want to turn the steering linkage to get this into place. You want to turn the rack and pinion to get it lined up. Next, you put a little bit of anti-seize on the through bolt and put the through bolt in, again starting it by hand so you don't cross thread. Once you got the through bolt in, you torque it down to 21 to 29 foot-pounds. So split that in half, 25 foot-pounds. Okay, now we get ready to install the outer tie rods. One thing I like to do, again, because it's exposed to the outside elements, and it also makes installation easier, and your alignment guy will probably love you for it, is put a little bit of anti-seize, just a little bit, like that, on the threads, so that as you're installing it, it'll spread out across. In addition, it'll help prevent it from rusting up, making it so that it's easier to align later on, especially as the miles get on and rust may build up and things like that. Having it, being able to rotate this thing is pretty much key to being able to align it, and also to get it off later if you ever need to. So now you put on the tie rod end the same number of turns that it took to take off. Now in my case, the new inner tie rods are shorter by a ½ inch than the previous ones, so I had to subtract a ½ inch from the number of turns, and that turned out to be about 9 turns. Previously it was 24 turns, or 24.5 turns, sorry. Subtract 9 gives you 15.5, so now I have to turn it 15.5 turns. So half, 1, 15. So now I cinch up the lock nut. There you go. Now is a perfect time to replace these tie rod ends if yours are bad. If they're loose at all, or if these boots are damaged, they should be replaced. They're fairly cheap and inexpensive, and you gotta have an alignment anyway, so you might as well do it now and get your steering back into good shape. These are made by a manufacturer called Moog, M-O-O-G. I recommend these. My cat apparently likes them too. They're greasable, unlike the factory tie rod ends. So now we move the steering knuckle into place, line it up, try to get that in frame without blocking the camera. There we go. Okay, now once you got that in all the way, just install the castle nut by hand, like usual. Okay, then you take a long socket and tighten it on down between 36 and 46 foot-pounds. So halve that and you got 41. So once you've got it torqued down, you want to find the hole for your cotter pin. In my case, it's right over here on the far side, and it's actually being blocked by one of these castle things. So what you do is you take your socket and you tighten until the hole becomes unblocked. Should only take like 1/8 of a turn. Okay, once you've got the hole unblocked, you get a new cotter pin and put it through the hole and bend it on up. Next, you put your anti-lock brake sensor back into place. Just slide it in the hole that it came out of. Put a little bit of anti-seize on the bolt, because again, this one is actually another common bolt to rust up, and because it's so small, it tends to break very easily. Just thread it in by hand and then tighten it down with the proper tool. Just snug it down. It does not need to be on that hard. And now grease up any greasable items like I have here. Put the tire back on and move on to the other side. So one of the instructions that come with the steering rack is to flush the power steering system after you do the install. The reason for this is chances are you probably have old fluid in your system, and also the fluid that's in the rack that came from the factory may not be the correct type for your vehicle. In this case, this car takes ATF +4 for its power steering fluid, and the fluid that's in the rack that when it came from the remanufacturer was a clear power steering fluid. ATF is red, so it's clearly not the right type. So I have to flush the system to flush out all the clear power steering fluid from the rack, and also to flush out any of the old fluid that I may have had in there. Now I'll be covering how to do that in a separate video. This video will just jump straight to adding fluid. So the first thing you want to do before you add fluid is to remove your serpentine belt. You want to do that for two reasons. One is so you don't get oil on it as you're adding fluid, and two is so that you can spin the power steering pump pulley manually in order to prime it. So what you want to do is you want to get an 18mm socket and a long wrench or whatever and lift up on it, and then at the same time, like with your thumb, slide the belt off the water pump and take the belt off. Don't forget to also grab your wrench. You get a 3/8 Allen key wrench, preferably on a ratchet, just to make it easier, and you stick it into the hole in the dead center of the power steering pump pulley. Okay, next you want to fill the power steering pump with as much fluid as you can without overfilling it. Next you want to take the wrench that you applied and turn the power steering pump pulley clockwise, keeping an eye on the fluid level. Don't let it run dry. Once the pump is getting close to being empty, but not all the way, you don't want to let air into the system. You top it back off again. So I wanted to show how low you should let the pump get, and this is about as low as you want to get it. If you notice on the left side there's a shiny metal thing. I'm not really sure what it is in part of the pump on the left side, but you don't want the fluid to get below that metal thing. At that point you're starting to suck air in, and you don't want that. So now the reason you want to do it this way instead of the method that most people use, which is turning the motor over, is because just a few turns, just like I just showed, will drain the power steering pump. You don't want it to go dry. Just turning the motor over will spin it a couple hundred times, and that's going to run the power steering pump dry pretty quick. You want to do this slowly and in a controlled manner so that you don't add air into the system. Okay, now that the fluid level is up to where it needs to be, you need to put the serpentine belt back onto the motor. If you don't remember the order in which it came, there should be a tag on the hood explaining the routing order. Okay, once you got the serpentine belt on, run your hand across all the pulleys and make sure that the belt isn't partially on or skipping a tooth, so to speak, all the way around all the pulleys. If that happens, you could cause undue stress on the serpentine belt when we try to start the motor in a second, and you could possibly break and or damage the belt, or a pulley for that matter. So make sure everything's in line before continuing. So now you turn the car on and you turn the wheel lock to lock a bunch of times. There really isn't any set number. You just keep doing it until the noise quiets down. But since you primed the pump already, there shouldn't be too much noise. Well, here it goes. So what I like to do is I like to open the driver's window with the car running so I can keep an eye on the power steering pump right there. And with my other hand, my free hand, I just rotate the steering wheel back and forth. All while keeping an eye on the power steering pump. So as you can see, one little air bubble in there. but what that actually is telling me is, one, that there was a bit of air in the system, and then two, it tells me that the pump is actually pumping the fluid and the fluid is flowing around in the system like it's supposed to. So you keep turning the wheel back and forth until the noise quiets down, making sure to do the car still in the air, by the way. So before you put the car back down on the ground, you want to climb underneath and look for any leaks. Make sure all the bolts and the ends and the lines going into the power steering rack aren't leaking. Double check the hoses going into and out of the pump, then put the car down and take it for a test drive. When you're done with the test drive, check to make sure that the fluid level remained at the same level and that there are no more air bubbles. The pump may make a little bit of noise to start off with, but that should dissipate as more and more of the air that may be in your system gets out. And that's it. So I hope this video helped you out. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave them in the comments section below. If you liked what you saw, click the like button. If you want to see more like it, subscribe. Hey, I just installed this rack. Haven't even taken it for a drive yet, but I've turned it on and it's leaking from right there. I don't know if you can see that on the video, but it's leaking from the center, from inside there. It's also leaking from inside those seams right there. You can see the fluid on my finger. This is a second rack that I've installed that has had some form of defect. I'm going to try and tighten that and see if that helps. Okay, I was able to tighten this. It actually moved a lot further than I thought it was going to. I got about a quarter to a half turn out of it, which is surprising to me. The paint came off when I hit it with some brake cleaner. Yeah, hopefully this fixes the leak.